Grimsdon by Deborah Abella. Chapter 15. A Frantic Cry. Woohoo! Xavier yelled into the skies as the aerotrope's wings flapped in the breeze. Griffin dug his fingers around the edges of the cargo box, his eyes clamped shut. "Tell me when we're home," he mumbled. "The city looks impressive from up here," Xavier leant out, tipping the aerotrope to one side. Griffin yelped. "Sorry about that, Griff." He could barely contain a broad smile. "We're nearly there," Isabella said. Griffin snuck a quick look of thanks. He was about to shut his eyes when he saw something in the distance. "Go faster!" he shouted. The panic in Griffin's voice sank into Xavier, and he pedalled harder. The aerotrope's wings pushed through the air with more force, the wind flooding beneath them, propelling them forward. "What can you see, Griff?" Isabella asked. "Something's wrong in the building opposite the palace." Isabella scanned the cluster of buildings, desperate to see what Griffin could see. Through wisps of cloud it began to appear. The building seemed to be leaning into the street. "Faster!" Her fingers dug into Xavier's chest. Griffin made out the statues on the roof of the palace, but as they got closer, he saw something else. Fly and Raffi were bent over the edge, searching below. "No," Griffin whispered. His chest felt as if the air had been sucked out of him. Xavier manoeuvred the aerotrope so that its nose tipped downwards, and they plunged lower. It was only at the last moment, just before they were over the roof, that Xavier tilted the wings and turned down the tail to reduce their speed. The aerotrope slammed hard against the roof. Xavier gripped the brakes. He grit his teeth as the tyres skidded and bounced past the sculptures, stopping just short of the roof's edge. Griffin had already undone his life jacket and torn off his helmet, flinging them aside. He ran to Raffi and Fly and dropped to his knees. He met Fly's pleading eyes before looking over the edge to see Bee hanging off the building opposite, clinging to a cable. Her legs scrambled to get some kind of grip, but there was nothing. "We were scavenging," Raffi panted through sniffling cries. "The building shifted to the side. We came back straight away. Bee was last, but the cable snapped and..." At that moment, Bee looked up. "Griffin!" She gave a brief, hopeful smile before the building staggered forward again with a great yawning creak. "Bee!" Raffi leant dangerously over the edge. Flying Griffin pulled him back and held him tight. "We'll get her." Isabella led Xavier to the aerotrope, picking up Griffin's life jacket from where he'd thrown it and tying it around her waist beneath her own. "You fly, I'll abseil down and grab her." She snatched the harness from the cable box and slipped it over her head. They jumped aboard, and within seconds Xavier had started her up. The wings came to life and the machine staggered forward. "Isabella's coming, Bee!" Griffin yelled. "Hold on!" The building tilted forward again. Bee's scream tore into Griffin. Windows smashed and splintered into the river. Walls cracked and jagged holes formed where clumps of stone broke away. "My hands are slipping. Please hold on, Bee," Raffi begged. The aerotrope lifted into the air and quickly crossed the divide between the buildings. Isabella secured a rope to the frame of the machine, while Xavier flew over to the spot where Bee dangled. She ran the rope through the harness and began to lower herself down. "Izzy!" Bee's voice was weak. "I'm coming, Princess Bee." Xavier held the aerotrope steady. "I'm almost..." Before Isabella could finish, the building jolted downwards and sank whole meters. Bee slipped down the cable. "I can't hold on. Just a little longer." "I'm sorry, Izzy." Bee's arms slackened, her legs stopped clambering, and she fell. Bee! Isabella screamed as the figure of her friend became smaller and smaller until she splashed into the river below. Isabella unhooked herself from the rope and she plunged after her, slicing through the air before slamming into the tumultuous current. Griffin scanned the waves, desperately hoping for some sign of the pair. Where are they? Raffi tugged forward again, and this time Griffin and Fly only just managed to hold him back. Tears fogged his eyes and he gulped air through bursts of sobbing. Griffin rose to his feet. Fly, stay here with Raffi. I'm going to help. Fly shook her head. It'll be okay. His smile looked more like a grimace. He kicked off his shoes and flung his glasses behind him. He looked down, his head spun, and his breath shortened. He lifted his trembling arms, ready to dive. As he went to jump, his knees buckled and he collapsed. His upper body hung over the edge. Raffi and Fly pulled him back. Fly gathered his glasses and slid them onto his nose. Griffin dragged his body upright, clutching his wrist to his chest, racked by wheezing breaths. Another loud crack echoed from the collapsing building. The river churned and rolled relentlessly. There she is! Raffi pointed at Bee's red curls. She spluttered and gasped, her hands smacking the water, trying to find something to hold on to. She keeps getting dragged under. Fly held Raffi's hand in a futile attempt to calm him down. Isabella emerged from the waves seconds later. She pulled her hair from her face and searched for Bee as another clump of stone broke away and smashed into the water just only metres away. She's there! Raffi shouted. Isabella followed Raffi's fingers and ploughed towards her, slamming her arms into the water. Please, 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 Raffi whispered. Fly tapped Griffin on the arm and pointed a little way upriver. There was something stirring in the water. What is it? As if in answer to Griffin's question, a curved back rippled with spikes curled out of the water before rolling back into the swell, pushing aside bulging waves on either side as it plunged below. It's heading straight for them, Raffi pulled forward. Let me go! Fly dug her fingers into his arms and held him back. Isabella! Griffin called. Watch out! She looked up, but by then the creature had disappeared. Bee tried to dog paddle against the current. She struggled to catch her breath between the waves that bullied into her. Behind, the sea beast again rose out of the water. This time, Isabella saw it. She paused long enough to take in the sleek movement of its arching back before she swam even harder, pushing against the waves, ignoring the pain in her arms and legs. Bee slipped beneath the waves again. Bee! Isabella stung with the panic of having lost her. She flicked her head, searching the roiling waves, and caught a glimpse of the tips of Bee's fingers. She dived, grabbing at the water until she felt Bee and pulled her to the surface. Her body was limp and her eyes were closed. Isabella scooped her up and slipped her arms through the spare life jacket. Xavier lowered the aerotrope as the collapsing building threw out another echoing groan and shifted downwards, showering more debris into the water. Isabella shielded Bee's body with her own, careful to hold her chin above the waves. She threaded the rope from the aerotrope through the harness before giving Xavier the nod. The machine slowly lifted. Water cascaded from their shoulders and hips. Again, the spiked back appeared through the waves, only metres away. Isabella turned to see the animal gaining on them and looked up to Xavier. His face was puce from pedalling, as he struggled to lift the aerotrope. The creature leapt from the water. With one last surge of energy, Isabella hauled her knees away from the rows of hooked, razor-sharp teeth that only just missed her. The jaws snapped shut and the creature plunged back into the waves. Griffin sighed and another yawning creak filled the air. "The building's going to fall on them," Raffi spoke through another sob. Xavier rammed his feet into the pedals, his legs burning from the strain. The aerotrope slowly gained height as his two twirling passengers were drawn upwards. The street echoed as the building sank further. A piece of window sill snapped and struck Isabella on the arm. A circle of blood blotched her sleeve. "Izzy!" Griffin watched helplessly as each agonising second passed. As the aerotrope approached the palace, the damaged building gave one last groan before disintegrating in a deafening rush of crackling timber, metal, and smashing glass. Walls of spray and wind battered them, but Xavier wouldn't stop pedalling. The palace vibrated beneath Griffin, Raffi, and Fly with the last of the collapse. The aerotrope descended, lowering Isabella and her precious cargo onto the roof. Griffin took Bee from Isabella's arms and gently lay her crumpled body down. "Bee," Raffi patted his sister's face. "Bee, please wake up." Isabella stepped out of her harness and knelt beside Bee. Tearing open her life jacket, she tilted the young girl's head back and pinched her nose and blew 2 short breaths into her mouth. She placed her ear to Bee's lips to listen for breathing, but there was nothing. Fly and Griffin crouched on either side of Raffi. Xavier had landed the machine and stumbled over. "Is she okay?" Isabella willed Bee's deathly still chest to rise. Her face was bluish and pale. Isabella blew 2 more breaths and turned to listen. "Please, please, please," Raffi quietly pleaded. The wind charged into them, turning Isabella's soaked clothes into an ice blanket. Her reddened fingers struggled to bend as she tried again. She blew 2 more breaths into Bee's mouth, but this time she came to life, coughing and spluttering bursts of water. Isabella forced Bee's crumpled frame into her arms. "Welcome back," she whispered. Raffi kissed his sister on the cheek. "You scared me for a minute there." "My throat hurts," Bee coughed. Isabella wiped Bee's curls from her eyes. "I think you may have drunk quite a bit of that river." Xavier swooped Bee into a blanket and carried her inside. Griffin watched them enter the palace. His shoulders fell as he cradled his injured wrist against his chest. Fly noticed it was scratched and bleeding. "She's okay," Griffin smiled weakly. "No thanks to me." Fly wrote on her notepad, "You're my hero." "Thanks, Fly, but if you ever need to be saved, you should change heroes." Fly shook her head and stabbed him in the chest with her finger. "All right," Griffin said, "but don't say I didn't warn you." Griffin waited for her to climb inside before he followed. He closed the door of the roof as a creature broke through the water below. It rolled through the waves and away from the palace, and then it was gone.